quiet like a church. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are visiting us for the first time this evening? Well, you are all welcome, and I hope for those of you who don't live in Norway and who might be here in New York again soon, follow us. We have a lot of exciting things coming up before the season ends at the end of July, but also the fall season has a lot of things to look forward to. And you don't want to miss it, I'm telling you. A couple of housekeeping announcements. We will have an audience Q&A, and when it's time to go to questions, if you're here, please raise your hand, and one of our fabulous interns will bring a microphone to you. That's so that the guests who are watching on the live stream can hear your question as well. And if you're watching on the live stream, you can type your question in the chat at any time. When the event is over, you can purchase copies of My Men in the bookstore and then make your way back in here up this center aisle to wait to get your book personalized. All of the books are pre-signed by both Damion and Victoria, so if that's good enough for you, you're all set. Our cafe and bar will be serving until 8:30, and drinks are allowed and encouraged. It's hot out there, so make sure you stay hydrated. And now for our guest, Victoria Shalen's first book, the 2013 short prose collection In the Heather, was shortlisted for the Tariai Veiesos Debutante Prize. In 2016, Shalen's first novel, Marsh Pond, was shortlisted for the Youth Critics Prize, and the Literary Committee of Norwegian's Authors Union awarded her the Norwegian Booksellers Primary Writer Scholarship. My Men is her breakthrough novel, published to rave reviews in Norway in 2021, and we're thrilled that it's now been translated and is available here. Damion Searls has translated more than 50 books of classic modern literature, most recently Thomas Mann's New Selected Stories and John Fosse's Septology and Bambi. His own writing includes fiction, poetry, and criticism, The Inkblots, A History of the Rorschach Test, and a biography of its creator, Hermann Rorschach. And The Philosophy of Translation is forthcoming. And Merve Emre is the Shapiro Silverberg Professor of Creative Writing and Criticism at Wesleyan University and the director of the Shapiro Center for Creative Writing and Criticism. Her books include Paraliterary, The Making of Bad Readers in Post-War America, The Personality Brokers, which was selected as one of the best books of 2018 by the New York Times, The Economist, NPR, and The Spectator, The Ferrante Letters, which was winner of the 2021 Prose Award for Literature, and the annotated Mrs. Dalloway. She has been awarded the Philip Leverhulme Prize, the Robert B. Silvers Prize for Literary Criticism, and the Nona Balakian Citation for Excellence in Reviewing by the National Book Critics Circle. She's a contributing writer at The New Yorker. Please welcome them all to the stage.
Are these on? Yeah. Hi, everybody. Are you all well lubricated? Is this on? Yeah? Can you hear me? All right, great. Welcome to our discussion this evening of My Men, not my men, but Victoria and Damion's men. I thought I might begin, Victoria, by asking you, for those who have not yet had the opportunity to read this extremely disturbing but very sexy book, if you could just give us an overview of who Belle was, where we might place her in the history of Norway, in the history of the United States, and why this story was an intriguing one for you as a novelist.
Yeah. The story with Belle is sort of easiest to sum up when you start with the end, because no one knew who she were until her farm was in fire one early April morning in 1908. And the farm...
Where are we in the U.S.? The farm is in...
LaPorte, outside of
Yes.
Chicago. Yeah.
Right.
The farm burnt down. They couldn't like stop it from burning. And in the ruins, they found 2 children and 1 female body without a head, strangely enough. And they started digging on the rest of the farm, and then it started showing up more and more parts of different bodies, and a total of around, we were talking about this, between 14 and 40 men. And then people started asking questions.
That's a big gap.
Yeah.
That's a big range.
Yeah.
14 to 40.
Yeah.
Well, the
14 to 40.
publisher lowballed it on the book. For some reason, they decided to say 14 people, but in various internet sources, you might see 25, you might see over 40, you might see up to 75, which is probably not a reliable number. But in any case, she is known as America's first female serial killer, if you want to give the sensational label.
Yeah. And what they found out when they started being curious of who she was and what she had been doing, they found that she had put ads in the paper, in a Norwegian paper called Scandinavian, or the Scandinavian paper. And she wanted to meet guys for marriage. Yeah, because she was a widow. Yeah, and she had been doing that quite a lot. And they answered, and what she, like the thing she almost always wrote was, sell all your stuff, don't tell anyone we're writing, and come to me as fast as you can.
This is how I online date as well.
With all your cash.
This is my strategy.
Yeah. And the strange thing is that they came. Yeah, but they didn't leave. Yeah.
So, I mean, you have to picture this is the like Norwegian bachelor farmers of the upper Midwest, sort of gold rush country analog where you have a lot of male immigrants and not a lot of female immigrants. And so there were a lot of ads from the men too. It wasn't just Miss Lonely Heart's personal ads from her. There would be ads from the men who had made their money and now wanted a wife from the old country. And so that's why there were Norwegian language newspapers being published in Chicago in the first place, because this was sort of the frontier days, tail end of the first wave of frontier days in the upper Midwest.
Norwegian Gentlemen Farmers of the Midwest does sound like a very good reality show.
Well,
that
Garrison
Damion-
Keillor
I thought
did
you were
it.
about to, I thought you were about to pitch it to us as that, So why, I mean, this is inherently, I think, a fascinating story for many reasons.
Yeah.
And I think the reasons different people find it fascinating could be a kind of Rorschach test, if you will. But why was this intriguing for you?
I think my first reaction when I heard of her is why haven't I heard of her before? So that was just like my guide into the story. And when I Googled her and researched her, I found a lot more, of course. But I think it's interesting, and I think our culture thinks it's interesting when women kill, and they kill planned, and they do it again and again and again and again. What is it about that? And I think it's sort of scary idea that if women kills, what could actually happen if they actually put it in the system? I think that is sort of like a dangerous idea that our culture is so fascinated by. Yeah. Even me.
So when Damion first told me about this book, the way that he pitched it to me was that this was Jon Fosse meets Gillian Flynn. And I had a really hard time imagining what that would sound like. And I think...
So just for anyone who doesn't know, Jon Fosse is this lyrical, sort of very beautiful, mystical, philosophical writer of like Scandinavian pure inner light.
And Gillian Flynn wrote Gone Girl.
And Gillian Flynn wrote Gone Girl.
Right. With the famous cool girl monologue, which it's very hard to imagine melding with Jon's mystical considerations of Meister Eckhart and other, 18th century mystics. So, but to give you a sense of what this voice sounds like, we thought we would read from the first 3 sections, let's say, of the novel. I will read the epigraphs. Damion will read translations of the Scandinavian newspaper that Victoria was mentioning, and then Victoria will read the first section, just to give you a sense of how extraordinary I think the voice that she has crafted to tell this story is. So let me start with the epigraphs. Love tends to go ever further and further, but there is a limit. When the limit is passed, love turns to hate. To avoid this change, love has to become different. Simone V. from Love and Gravity and Grace. The second one. I live to lift you up, but who would lift me up? When you were up among the clouds and I was lying here on the ground. And that's Molly Sandén, Without You. Damion?
Scandinavian Norwegian language newspaper, Chicago, 1904 to 1908. Offer of matrimony, farmer, 26, in North Dakota, few acquaintances, seeks to correspond with Scandinavian girl or widow. Financial situation not important, serious replies only, include photo. Offer of matrimony, bachelor, 30, good-looking, affluent, lives in a city, wishes to correspond with a girl under 30 who knows how to appreciate the value of a beautiful home. Send photo in first letter. Offer of matrimony, widower, 45, looking to meet a girl or childless widow of Norwegian background between 25 and 40. Strong references available and required. I can provide a good home, free of cares, since I am in good financial circumstances. Address available from this paper.
City of Angels, California, 1915. Tongues of flame flickered in the fireplace, hot and silent. Belle needed a window to rest her cheek on, to cool her skin. Glowing red, fresh as dew, calm and hot. These little mustache hairs. She ran her fingers over her lips and heard her murmuring lungs. She lit a cigarette and looked out at the city. The enormous oak tree in the evening sun reached its long, gnarled roots along the wall and into the ground. The roots coiled around the fence, crept out under the grass. Clotheslines ran between the branches, sheets and panties flapping gently in the wind. There are things I can't ever admit, she whispered. Things that are too big, too much. She could hardly breathe. That could destroy me. The words grabbed her by the throat. Belle didn't know when it was all going to snap, but she knew it would. A bullet, an inverted lung, a postscript to 1,000 wars. Tears ran down her face. There are too many of you. She felt her stomach turn in the darkness, one muscle after the other. The evening sun was low in the sky. Her upper lip had chapped and split right down the middle. She took a deep drag of the cigarette. Little words, almost a little scream, filled her mouth between the smoke and the teeth, tickling her gums, forcing their way out between her slack lips. No one who loves with their whole self can survive it. The waves of the Pacific rolled restlessly onto the shore. The dark shimmer shone toward her, and her voice filled the whole room. A truth so huge that it stood in everything else's way. The words reached toward the window. There was something about the little wrinkles around her eyes. Her skin's little traces of everything that had happened, of time's furrowed face, of all the problems lurking in her lungs. Belle felt it with a perfect clarity, the shimmer, the salt water almost blinding her. There are too many of you.
So it might be surprising to the reader who picks this up, assuming that they're going to read a kind of true crime novel, or maybe historical fiction about the first female serial killer, would encounter a statement like, "No one who loves with their whole self can survive it," or encounter an epigraph from Gravity and Grace about the nature of love. Why choose to tell this story with that particular emotional focus? Why not tell it straight as true crime or historical fiction?
Because we have that already.
Okay.
And the story about Belle, at least in Norway, but it seems to me the same here in the States, is that it's told as an interpretation of what happened, but it's a lot of exaggeration, and it's a lot of moral description on what she did, which is, of course, it's horrible what she did. But I think since I'm allowed, since I'm a writer, and I can write whatever I want, I think it's interesting to make up an sort of alternative reality. What we don't know. Why, if we try to understand this in another way? She was an actual human. She did live. She wasn't born a serial killer. Something happened to her that drove her off this cliff. And to me, what is most like common among us humans is our longing for love. And that can make us do extreme stuff and horrible stuff, but also beautiful stuff. But in this case, I think it was her longing for love that drove her to the extreme. And that is the story I wanted to tell, because I wanted sort of like to look at her with empathy and try to see what was here, like to actually look closer, what is here, yeah.
There's a nice line a little bit later on in the novel where the narrator is reflecting on how close beauty and violence are. The beauty that comes out of love and the violence that comes out of love are joined in a way that we might not expect. Damion, did you expect that when you received the sample and started to translate it? Were you as surprised by Victoria's kind of angle on Belle as I was?
Well, I didn't have time to be surprised, because the first thing you get is this first. I mean, there's the little blips of the newspaper, which is, you know, pretty funny.
Right.
And then immediately you get this stuff about no one who loves with their whole heart can survive, or their whole self. And so I didn't have time to be kind of fooled by the packaging into thinking I wasn't told by the person who sent me the sample, like, it's a serial killer thriller, you know.
Right.
So no, personally no. But I do think that, you know, when I was reading around, like the interviews that you had done in Norwegian, for example, there was one that definitely struck me, and which was where you said, I hope it's okay that I say that. I hope you're not like keeping it secret or something. Yeah, so there was an interview quite early on where Victoria said that she wrote the book emotionally autobiographically. And I thought that was very powerful. And of course, the male journalist was like, ooh, your boyfriend better be scared, like kind of stupidly and stuff. But what was very clear from the interview, despite the interviewer, was that, you know, I think you said something like, I was falling in love, I was thinking and doing all sorts of crazy things. And so that's the like emotional core I was writing from. And so that like really made it very clear to me that this is a story that really frames all the very extreme stuff Belle Gunness did in terms of like looking for love. So it wasn't a surprise. It was like pretty clear.
There's an incredible intensity to the narrative voice. And one of the things that really struck me as I was reading it was that I was having trouble placing where exactly the narrator is, because it's a third person narrator, but it's a third person narrator who at times seems to live within Belle's body. And there are these extraordinarily physical descriptions, but the physical is always shading a little bit into the spiritual or the metaphysical. So you will have, you know, her feeling of confronting intense color in the world and feeling it behind her eyes. You're like, well, wait a second, where exactly is that? And how do you know? And where are you relative to her body? How did you think about creating the voice that tells the story and what its relationship to her body would be?
Yeah, as you say, that interview came up. Yeah.
Is your boyfriend? He's alive.
Yeah, he's alive. He's here.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, and the book is also dedicated to him. But
So seriously, is it okay that I said
yeah,
that?
but the thing is that has been quite a hit amongst the different journalists. So it's like, oh, I heard you. Yeah, talk a little more about that. And
Well, I mean, what you said was really good, even though it was taken in the stupid way.
Yeah, but I can say something about it because it was a big part of the process. It was because I read about her for the first time, and then I was like, why haven't anyone written about her before? Because as we talked about, there has been done a lot of things about her, like musicals, like slapstick shows, album records, radio plays, but not like anything seriously, always done with like this type of humor that shows like a fat, ugly woman who is really mean and everyone is laughing of her, yeah. But I didn't know how to actually use this material for something good, because if you're going to write about a real person, you have to like know what you're doing, and you have to do it, you have to be good at it, because then you can just make things up if you're not good at it. So you need to be precise, and you need to know what you're doing, and you need to try to show something else, not because otherwise I could just write about her in like this straight, ordinary way. So I think it went like 5 years or so. And then I met my boyfriend, and then I fell so madly in love that I felt a bit crazy. And I thought, this is a rhythm. This is an intensity, and this is a perspective which I can use to sort of tell something about Belle, which is deeply human. And this is that you can have feelings that will make you feel that you can do anything, like beyond any borders of morale, and yeah. And I also felt that I can also throw away my old life and I could just be in this. And I also felt that I didn't have any perspective. It was like I couldn't see anything because he was up in my face all the time.
Right.
And that is also a big part of this book, that there's no horizon, or there's you can't see very far because you only see what's right in front of Belle.
Right.
So when I found that rhythm and that sort of feeling and intensity, then it made me able to use something completely normal to explain something not so normal, or the how she's slowly drifting,
that's a really
drifting
nice,
off.
That's a really nice explanation. And as you were speaking, one of the things I was thinking is that her perception is limited to a kind of radius of maybe a half foot around her body.
Yeah.
And it's always coming back inside and trying to venture out, but never getting all that far before it has to retreat back in. And there's something about the claustrophobia.
Yeah, and that is a big
voice.
part of it. Yeah, because she cannot escape herself as well.
Right.
So she's,
and neither can we.
No.
Yeah.
And for me, and it was to find that rhythm, and it was also to find where the narrator is supposed to be. And to me, the narrator is here on her shoulder, just watching inside her head, and then.
Right.
But it can't like move around. It's just like.
That's interesting. Yeah.
goes inside and then out, goes inside and then out. Yeah.
And that's one of her problems with America too, because there's great scenes where this immigrant is like taking the train from, you know, Ellis Island or whatever, to the upper Midwest. And the landscape is so crazy. It's so huge. And there's so many lakes and there's like so much sky. And so it's interesting. I hadn't really consciously made the connection between how different that is from the claustrophobia of every other part of the book.
Right.
So, I mean, she finds it kind of difficult to handle American landscape in general. But you've just explained why, because like she lives, you know, with her boyfriend right in her face. That's like her zone.
Right.
And so, you know, a huge American horizon, or the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, which is a scene in the book, you know, is more difficult for her to handle than most people.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say something, or I'll confess to something a little bit unfair, Damion, which is that, you know, this is a novel where that kind of claustrophobic intensity also has an erotic charge, and that erotic charge to me is so obviously feminized. And that was a little funny for me reading it, knowing these were your words. And I couldn't quite, I had these moments where I would be like, oh, it's funny to think of Damion writing this.
Well,
What
no,
were the
that's a compliment.
challenges?
That's not
yeah,
a...
no.
Yeah.
It is a compliment. It is a great compliment. And I guess I wonder, you know, what were the challenges for, I'm not saying that was necessarily a challenge, but in recreating that claustrophobic, a highly bound narrative voice, very embodied narrative voice. What were the challenges for you in translating it? I mean, are there particular habits, grammatical habits of Norwegian that let Victoria convey that in ways that English makes more or less difficult?
Well, so the first part of what you said was indeed a challenge, because there's this very physical yet abstract language. And, you know, English handles sexuality different than other languages do in general. So any translator from any language will tell you how hard it is to translate sex scenes or sexual parts from Spanish or from like other
Turkish.
adult languages into English, where it's only like super medicalized and technical, or else super vulgar and, you know, curse word. And so how do you like talk about it? And so this is not a book that particularly has those much, but it has a lot of like very unclear boundaries between her body and the rest of the world. That was one of the most helpful things you said to me in the translation process, where I was like, what does this mean? And you were like, well, every threshold between her and the outer world, like, is kind of a problem for her. And I'm like, okay, that explains it. So, you know, when we're in this scene and suddenly, like, there's her tip jutting out into the room, like, where do you go with that as a translator? There's
Right.
quite a range of how concrete or specific, how metaphorical is it, how just straight ahead anatomical is it, like, what are we actually talking about? And you have to decide. So on the like male writing female bodily perspective, like, I did have those questions I had to ask myself. But in general, you know, Norwegian is a language that doesn't use personal pronouns the same way. It just, so for example, if you're holding out your hand to shake hands with someone, you'd say, he held out the hand. And that's just how you'd say it. That's just the normal way to say it. And you know whose hand it is. Or like, she wiped the hair from the forehead. You would just say it with the instead of with her. And so normally that's fine. That's not a translation problem. You just translate it as she brushed her hair from her forehead. But if there's a scene where like the fear bubbled up from the lungs, and you're like, is this her? Or is this like the guy she's about to kill?
Right.
Like,
Right.
whose fear are we talking about? And I would send an email to Victoria and be like, whose fear is it? And she would write back, both. Because of course that's how it works in Norwegian. It can mean both, and it can kind of give you this sense of her not being super clear on the boundaries without it sounding completely crazy. But in English it does sound completely crazy, so you have to like pick. You have to either rewrite it in some impersonal way that works, or kind of land on his fear or her fear. So usually it is clear enough from context that you can sort of pick it, and otherwise you just sort of work with it. But
to Victoria's point, part of what is being conveyed here is a kind of craziness of perception, and a kind of craziness of perception that turns on the inability to identify boundaries between self and other, internal, external, mind, body, et cetera, right?
no, this is the sort of key thing that is always going on in any translation, which is that you're trying to tell the difference between what's just a tick of the language. I mean, you would say he held out his hand. You wouldn't say he held out the hand, because he's not like holding a severed hand. Like, and so that's just a tick of the language, and you don't need to preserve it. But if you are an artistic writer who's using that aspect of the language, whether or not you're even consciously aware that that's specific to your language or not, you're still, a great writer who is aware of what the language resources are, and you push those resources to express something stronger. Well, then you can't just fix it, because you're not just switching one language to another, it's the artistic voice and message of the writer. So that's the tricky part.
One of the things that really struck me as I was reading was that part of the way this novel is gathering its intensity and its energy and its tension is by this back and forth between moments where Belle seems to be saying, in italics, to herself or to someone else, I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to express this. And then that's when the narrator swoops in and gives us something that is expressed in incredibly intense colors, incredibly intense sensations. The transition phase of a solid to a liquid, there's a lot of language of melting, there's a lot of language of light, a lot of language of prickling here. And I wonder, Victoria, how you thought about that, because this is a novel in which there is really almost nothing, very little dialogue, right? There's almost no dialogue, and the dialogue that there is often about inexpressibility, or it's a kind of refrain that a man says to a woman, like my little honey, or whatever it is that Mad calls her. And that is always being played off of this intense narration. How did you think about that? How did you think about what speech you would give to her or to the characters? Or did you think about withholding speech consciously?
I think for me, she is trapped inside herself. And it's also sort of a technical question when you as of writing, because when you place the narrator here, you have limited ways of showing her between the looks of the looks of others.
Right.
So that's what the dialogue sort of I try to do with the dialogue. That's when you actually see her in contact with the world or the reality, and that's when you can sort of see where she gradually is moving towards her more and more craziness.
Right.
But mostly the dialogue was also a question on how we were supposed to like.
Or the italics?
The italics, yeah.
Yeah, we fought about the italics.
Yeah.
Why did you fight about the italics?
Because you don't italicize things in Norwegian.
Yeah, and I did
so she
not
wanted
want
it
that.
to blend in and have it not register as different at all. Right. And
but the thing is the thing is that most of the italics is her talking to herself.
Whispering.
So it's sort of a part you don't know if it's her or if it's the narrator talking, or who is actually talking here. And that to me is like, that's a good confusion. But when
But
we
you
were
insisted,
talking about it, it was
on
like,
clarifying this
it doesn't work.
confusion.
Yeah, we need to know who's talking. And to me, it's like,
Well, it's not that we
everything is
need to
talking.
know who's talking. I mean, like, as we heard in the passage, like, it is kind of coming from a strange space. But what I ended up arguing, and partly, you know, as a translator, I'm producing a book that exists in English, in an English language tradition and stuff. So I'm thinking of people like Faulkner, where when you have these voices in italics, it doesn't tell you who it's coming from, but it tells you that it's a different kind of voice.
Yeah.
And it in fact increases rather than decreases the sense of where is this voice coming from, what is this?
Yeah.
So in Faulkner, in Light in August, you know, one of the characters who's basically illiterate has this italics voice of her thoughts, which is very intellectual. And so it's his way of like capturing these sort of different registers of her own inner subjectivity and stuff like that. So I just felt, I mean, first of all, like your average copy editor will say, when you're quoting dialogue, you need to put it in quotation marks or italics or something. But aside from that, I felt that that was the way to increase rather than decrease this sense of there's a voice, but where is it coming from?
Yeah.
You know,
Sorry.
No, I think it worked out, but my gut reaction was, no, this is no good. This is no good.
Right, because in Norwegian you don't have it. In Norwegian, you also don't italicize things like the titles of books and newspapers and stuff. So it's like, why are you making this stand out so much?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, in English it doesn't. That's just how you say it.
Yeah,
So
because
this is the translation like debate.
Yeah, because in the beginning it was screaming to me, and I wanted to be quiet. Yeah, but to comment what you said on her like tactile extreme experiences, it is, to me, it's like Belle is sort of a child who is like, she's really open to the world, but she also has this hole inside of her, and everything is just like coming straight through. And she's trying to fill this hole, if it's with light or with love or with words or her experiences. She's trying to just become whole, sort of, and it doesn't work. So she's continuing, and she's too open for this world, sort of. And that is the sentence which I read in the beginning. If you love with your whole self, you won't survive love, sort of. And that is because it is like you have to go all in, and that is like the ultimate place for love. It's in her logic, it's death. Yeah.
but there's also an interesting tension there between another line that you read in the introduction that repeats twice, which is there's too many of you, right? So on the one hand, there's that hole that cannot be filled, that is kind of bottomless and empty. It is the abyss, it is the void.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there's too many in there.
Yeah.
Right. And so that seems to me one of the, that the tension that drives the whole novel, right? That tension between the omnipresence of so many people, because there are so many characters in this novel, actually, and the fact that none of it is going to be enough. And it is so because of your language, because of the claustrophobia and the placement of the narration, for me at least, that was all so intense and shocking and weird that by the time I got to the murders themselves, they actually didn't seem all that out of the ordinary or that unusual. And there's something so interesting about writing this book based on this figure and writing it in such a way that the thing she is actually known for is not the shocking thing that you encounter in the novel, right? The style is actually much more shocking than the plot itself is. How did you think about that? I mean, how did you think about plot relative to style? Because it is a novel that is broken up into these relatively short intervals, let's say, each of which has a very kind of striking title to it. But the murders don't start happening until kind of late into the novel. So how are you thinking about plotting versus style?
Yeah, I have gotten that question sometimes. Why aren't there more murders?
No, that's not what I'm asking.
No, I know.
Just the
But
right number of murders. You have a perfect number of murders, however many there are.
But I think the answer is the same to both questions, and it's not about the murders. It's about her.
Right.
It's about her, and it's not about the men. Yeah, ironically, since the book is called My Men. But
Is it also, it's also called that in Norwegian. It's called My Men.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mine men.
Mine men.
Yeah. And I think that is not the important point of her actually doing the killing.
Right.
And I don't want the novel to be sensational. I want the reader to be able to follow her state of mind. And if I had placed her in a constant killing spree, I don't know how to do that.
Right.
I think that wouldn't be a good novel.
Right.
So I think it's interesting to write her psyche, or her development in her psyche, and then actually see what happens when she stops, and you will get to see what she sees. And that is some of the moments in the book where you actually get some sort of distance.
Yeah.
And you will able to look down and actually see something which is more than a meter away. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that happens pretty late.
Yeah,
You only
it
give
does.
us that distance once we've gotten quite used to being with her, in her, around her.
Yeah, and I think that because I think Belle's main problem was herself, not her killing, or of course it became her.
Depends who you ask.
Yeah, but the project of the book is her longing for love and her logic, and she has this strange logic, which I sort of wanted to show. And her logic is, there is a place in the book where, because she wants, to me, every day when she wakes up, she's sort of okay, now is the time that I will be loved in the right way. Right. He will love me, and he will, I will not have to kill him. Right. This is the time where he will see through me, and he will love me for who I am.
Right.
Like we all want. But she puts her men to a test in different ways. I think all of us do to our partners and the one we love. But a test she does with one of her men. He's asking Andrew, I think it is, to pull her hair underwater. So if they don't pass the test, then she can kill them. But if they pass the test, like this, the water test. So he pulls her hair underwater, but he doesn't let go. So if he's passing the test, and he's more strong than her, and love her in the right way, he will also be able to kill her.
Right.
So you can't win with Belle.
Right.
So if you love her in the right way, that she wants, that she needs, then the men will be too powerful.
Right.
And they will probably kill her in her logic in the end.
Right.
So she had, so she has to protect herself.
So it's either preemptive, right, or it's, I see.
So that is sort of the logic I want to show. And that she was quite alone in this world. She lived quite isolated. Yeah.
I'm going to turn to the audience for questions in 1 minute, so just start preparing yourselves. Damion, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I often at these events think to myself, what is the person who's out here who hasn't read the book thinking about the book? And is that accurate or not? So I guess I just want to say in praise of Victoria and this book that it really even though we're talking so much about this kind of abstract level or this sort of very disembodied or hyper-embodied, like confusing, whatever, the book really manages to, in fact, let us see her the way that we want novels to show us the characters. And so even if it's in these flashes of like, suddenly she's on the floor holding the cross like over her head with the elbows on the floor praying. And it's just like mentioned, but suddenly we get this vision of like, oh my God, this is how she's in the world. This is why her sister thinks she's weird, because like she won't stop praying like this, you know, instead of coming to have dinner at the dinner table or whatever. So in fact, I just want to mention, like, it's not all of this kind of bodily philosophical stuff. Like, we really do get the novel pleasures of like suddenly seeing her behaving in some weird way, or, you know, in some kind of actual interaction with people. So we really are kind of hooked and kind of feeling for this character and like wondering what's going to happen next. So unlike Merve, I'm not as struck by the sort of murders being kind of the boring part or whatever, because like all the way through.
I also didn't say that. I think the murders are very interesting to me, and I would maybe place the pleasure of the novel slightly differently, Damion, which is to say, the pleasure for me of the novel is the pleasure of actually being inside someone in a different way than a typical 19th century novel, say, lets us into the mind of a character, and in a different way than a typical modernist novel lets us into the mind of the character. This actually makes me feel like I am merged with her flesh. And that is why those moments when you get her from the outside, when you write like, and then she went down to the kitchen and decided to roll some dough and make some bread, you're like, that's a shock, right? And that's a shock because you're like, I was with her, I was in her. How did I get to the kitchen to make bread, right? So to me, the hook is that pleasure of being kind of imaginatively merged with another person's flesh and then being dragged out of that.
Yeah.
You're waiting to get back into it. So that's the kind of propulsion, and that's why I describe it as
Okay, I agree with that.
Yeah,
I
good.
take it
Thank
back.
you. Yeah. Questions from the audience, now that I've gotten Damion to agree with me. If you want to fight on italics for the next one, you can just enlist me and I'll fight with you.
But I can also say that I don't know if any of you have seen the Netflix documentary, The Tinder Swindler. Yeah, for me that is a sort of like...
Wait, what's it called?
The Tinder Swindler.
The Tinder Swindler. Okay, right.
And to me, and the first interview in that documentary is quite like, it's make me tear up because it's in an interview with a Norwegian girl who was because he met the girls on Tinder and then he scammed them for millions.
Right.
And she's talking about her idea of love. And she's she's like, her eyes are full of tears. And she's talking about where she first learned about love. And that was in the Disney movie, The Beauty and the Beast.
Right.
Which is also have a bell. But I think that is sort of, I think that is sort of the type of the same longing for love, which the women in that documentary is talking about, that I think Belle is having here. Yeah, it is relatable in a weird way.
Yeah.
And the poor old Norwegian bachelor farmers too. I mean, like, it's kind of ridiculous that they do sell all their stuff and bring their cash to Belle's farm, and like no one will understand our love. But they're looking for love too. You know, like.
Well, it's the Midwest. Everyone's lonely and cold. They just want. They're just looking for love.
But they're doing the exact thing.
Right.
They're giving her all their money because they just want love.
Right. Yeah. Right. Questions from the audience? Yes, what's your name?
And we'll come over to you with
John,
a microphone.
Hello. Yeah, do we have a roving mic? Thank you.
Coming over.
John, hi.
Yeah, my question is, how important is that this is an immigrant experience? Meaning that being an immigrant gives a lot of freedom. Often what happens in leaving your home country is you can remake yourself and be someone different. But part of that is also that can be intensely lonely. You suddenly say, all the borders are gone, I can be whoever I want. Oh my God, I'm all by myself. And So I was wondering how much could this happen in Norway itself, is sort of my question, and how important it is that it does happen in the United States with people remaking themselves.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
I think for Brynhild, which was her name when she left Norway, she was the second wave of Norwegians going to the States. Something happened to her in Norway, which was quite fundamental. This is in the book, so I won't spoil it. Which is quite fundamental for her life. So she was sent off to her sister here. And I think that was to have a better life, sort of, to get away from all she had experienced. So I think that is a big part of it, that she was like traveling from a really, really poor country. Norway, what you said before?
Yeah, Norway, it's hard for us to recapture, but before they found natural gas off the coast, it was dirt poor. It was the poorest country in Europe, poorer than like Greece and the Portugal, sort of Mediterranean poor countries of today. That's why such a gigantic proportion of the Norwegian population, I think second only to the Irish population, emigrated to the US. It was just like absolute dirt poor cod fishermen.
Yeah,
like,
she had nothing. She came from nothing. Yeah, so that is a big part of it. And a lot of the people, Norwegians who went over, came back again because it was too hard here. But
the community seems quite the Norwegian community in America also seems quite claustrophobic. Yeah, right?
It was quite tight. And the community, as they were when Belle was here, they were not learning American. They did not want American in their churches. They didn't marry. They only married Norwegians. And if you didn't marry or lived in sin, like without marriage, then you were kicked out. So it was quite strict. And she only had her sister here. So that was sort of, in my book, that's sort of the relationship she had that kept her grounded. And when she loses that, she's spiraling off. So I think that if she had been closer connected to her neighbors and her family and other people, the story would have been otherwise.
But I mean, to maybe add on to that question a little bit, it's not a story of freedom, and it's not a story of assimilation.
No.
But in some ways, it's a story about leaving home and finding that you still can't escape yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's aiming for freedom in the kind of cliche way. Like, there's a scene of crossing the ocean on the boat and coming to America, and she's definitely leaving the old country behind, and like, thank goodness she's coming to the new country where everything will be new and better. Right. I mean, like you were saying, every morning she wakes up thinking, so it's like a very American immigrant story in that sense of the like dream of reinventing yourself and like having it all work out. And in fact, they did all get a lot richer than they were in Norway. So on a certain pragmatic level, you know, they did get to come to America and own farms and like succeed and have a better life than they had before. And that's true of Belle too, even if some of the money she came into was through underhanded means. Like, I have to tell one story. I was a little sad it didn't end up in the book, only because I love it. But one of her husbands, they had a new life insurance policy that started January 1st, and the old life insurance policy ended not on December 31st, but January 1st. And you'll never guess what day this man met an unfortunate fatal end, and so she got both payouts. That's how she bought the farm in LaPorte, right?
Yeah, that was with both her marriages.
Oh, that happened twice?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, that's the American dream right there.
Other questions from the audience?
And we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Yes, there.
Hi, I'm Marcus. Thank you for this great conversation. I think, Merve, you mentioned the really fantastic chapter or section titles, and I'm curious when they became kind of part of the fabric of the novel.
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember that I had like.
Should we just give a sample of some of those?
Yeah.
So the one I've landed on is, no one said life was easy. And then the one after that is, everyone always loves someone else. And then after that,
So yeah, it's these moments of getting an authorial intelligence that's not connected to Belle and her weird mind. So
the lakes overflow with what fills the heart.
Right. So, like, where is that coming from? What does that mean? Well, at least it's not Belle. So it is this kind of punctuation mark, I think, for the reader at least. So that's the effect answer, not the intent answer. So I don't know, like, when you thought of it, but like, that's how I felt it worked. You know, or there's even the one that's like Big Lake, Gun Lake, Fish Lake, Clear Lake, or whatever. It's like this list of, you know, that's what the Upper Midwest is like, and so that's a section title. And so again, like, that's a moment of it not being Belle.
Yeah, that's true. I think it started out with something that I called the death fantasies, which it were supposed to be her death fantasies, sort of, like capturing the different chapters. But then that became like too hard to actually have as titles, so I just incorporate that in her. In the full text, but
they're quite funny. I mean, similar to the way that Damion's reading of the excerpts from the Scandinavian newspapers was funny. The chapter titles are funny, and they give us this kind of moment of comic relief in a novel that is not otherwise explicitly or even implicitly funny.
Yeah, there's love in hell too. Yeah.
Reality is like death; it catches up with everyone eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, that's something that I think is partly chalk upable to the translator, right? Like, I mean, I took the moment where I thought I could give it a different kind of energy and like tried my best to make it kind of odd in a way that reads as humorous, because the oddness was how I felt it was functioning, right? So I'm not sure it necessarily would have read that way in other versions, but like, that is certainly, because I saw it working as this kind of out of left field weird blip in the otherwise claustrophobic narrative. I think that's why it reads as funny, because that's what humor is, right?
Yeah, and my editor told me to read the Blood Meridian, is that?
Blood Meridian?
Yeah.
Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah, because how he writes like the different chapter titles.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I had that. I tried out that somewhere in the process, but that didn't work as well as I would. That became like too funny because I wanted to capture, like make a summary, sort of.
Right.
And then so it's been a process. But yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. I hope if you take one thing away from this, it is that your spouse can get a life insurance policy that ends on January 1st, and the next one can start on January 1st, and you'll get double payout if anything happens to them. So with that, have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Damion. Thank you, Victoria. Congratulations. It's a marvelous book. Really wonderful. And you're going to tell people where they can buy it.
Yes,
you have one.
yes,
Okay,
thank you
sorry.
so much, all three of you. And I neglected to say a huge thank you to the Norwegian Consulate General here in New York for bringing Victoria over and Damion here and giving you all drinks before the event started. So thank you very much. Wonderful partners with us.